Disclaimer: I am in no way a professional reviewer. Everything stated in this review is simply my opinion and in no way a fact. I'm just someone who likes to play games and understand how they work. Amnesia: The Dark Descent, released in 2010, is a first-person survival horror game with elements of puzzle solving. It's quite famous, since it is the game I'd argue kickstarted many popular YouTuber gamers' careers. So what makes this game so interesting and special? For starters, it was a completely new horror experience that was unparalleled to any other game at the time. It was a game that left you completely helpless as you ran away from monsters and tried to keep yourself from going insane. There were many unique gameplay elements that were never seen before, such as an insanity meter. So let's break down this game, give it a full comprehensive review. I will be covering this game in categories and explaining the pros and cons of each section. In this review, I will cover atmosphere, gameplay, music and sound design, story, NPC and enemy design, and casual appeal. So to start off, let's take a look at the biggest part of this game, which is the atmosphere. This game excellently put together a feeling of helplessness as you were just stuck in this castle trying to navigate it and understand what was happening. It gives off a true horror experience where you can feel your spine chill from the hearing of the growl of the monsters or even the wind whistling sound. Add on some music and you can feel like you're going to be killed at any second. There is nothing like the feeling when first playing this game because you feel confident that you won't get scared. The game then uses the chilling atmosphere to break that down. The eerie atmosphere that most of the levels give off of this game is a unique touch where whoever is playing can get trapped in that world. Going off of that, there is also the environment design that adds to the feeling of helplessness. There are intricate mazes that sometimes make it easy to get lost in it all. Although this game is generally linear, there are some instances where you can easily get lost early in the game, such as here, where there are multiple options. With the atmosphere being so eerie and creepy, there are drawbacks that follow suit. The biggest one is that to get a full experience, you have to play this in the dark with headphones on. Now, this doesn't seem like a big deal and may just be nitpicking, but for some people this can't happen because say it's sunny out and they don't have the blinds that block out the sun. They would have to play at night, which can be an inconvenience for them. So you can play this game during the day with speakers, but you wouldn't get as scared easily, which is kind of the point of the game. Another major issue I ran into was the brightness of the game. While you can adjust the brightness of the game itself, there are certain sections, such as here, that show how difficult it is to see. When you get close to it, yes, you can see it, but the problem is that if there's nothing there, then I've kind of wasted my time. Of course, on the contrary, this adds to the mystery of the atmosphere, giving off a fear of the unknown kind of feeling. Moving on to gameplay, the controls are very basic. If you're playing on PC, then you use WASD to move around and the mouse to interact with environments. On controller, it generally is the same, but the bumper buttons to use stuff. However, it is very awkward at times to use and can be very clunky. But I won't go deep on how to play the game, that's for you to figure out. I'm just here to review it. The movement itself is responsive and smooth, although when your sanity drops, you're basically playing Drunk Simulator. Other than that, my only gripe with the movement is that when you either have the flashback scenes and your movement is severely slowed down, or when the game tries to simulate you cowering in fear, the camera controls are basically taken over. These are unavoidable and can break immersion very rapidly.
Alexander, is it inside the castle?
In a manner of speaking. Come, bring the lamp. You've been to the refinery, have you not?
I don't believe I have. Is it connected to the... what did you call it?
The inner sanctum. My most precious chamber, Daniel. And it lies well beyond the refinery. In fact, it lies beneath the very stone of Brennenburg.
For its time, the gameplay was actually very unique. I'm no history expert, but this game was certainly the one that stood out where there was no means of self-defense or combat at all. It was unique in that you had to run and hide to avoid being killed, instead of going headfirst against the enemy and killing them. This kind of leads to a double-edged sword, unfortunately. Since there is no combat and only puzzle solving, the game mechanics and dynamics are quite limited, and there's little sustenance to keep this game pumping. As far as the puzzle mechanics go, there is a balance of good and bad puzzles. None of it stands out that truly made me go, that was amazing, or that was really clever. Here, this is a simple puzzle, but I've seen too many gameplays where they completely miss this lever. Other puzzles are pretty good though, like this book one, where you have to pull off the 3 off-color books to open the secret door. Unfortunately, it's not very secret since you can see it pretty easily. Player dynamics are essentially the choices that the player has on how to approach a problem in a game. The puzzles are very linear, so there isn't room for choice when trying to solve it. There are some ways where the player can handle a situation when faced with an enemy. They can either run and hide until they go away, or throw an object at the enemy and run away. And that essentially sums it up, which is not a lot to say at the very least. This lack of dynamics does serve a purpose, though, if I'm interpreting this correctly, and that is to take away as many player choices as possible to render the player helpless so that they have a bigger fear when they immerse themselves. For its lack of gameplay, the game does excel in sound design. It is one of the biggest part of the game's structure, as the creepy noises really add to a horror feeling. Without it, the game wouldn't be as scary, to say the least. With that, the sound effects are very much believable, albeit a little overused sometimes, such as the door opening and closing every time you enter a new area. It does become repetitive and overbearing at times. Not only that, some of the sounds are a little unnecessary, such as the wind blowing. That's just a nitpick though. The voice acting in the game is very well done. It may not be the most believable, but it gets the job done of putting you in the story.
My God! Wilhelm, do something!
Accept it. We're not getting out of here.
How can you say that? Alexander, you piece of shit! Let us out of here!
The only issue that I see with the voice acting is, as I said before, the forced cutscenes in the game that causes you to listen to it. Some dialogue can just be skipped, like here.
16th later tomorrow.
The music alone does exist in the game, and its use of timing is very well done, but I personally would have liked a little more of it. However, there are moments when the music really adds to the atmosphere. Note, I'm talking about actual background music and not sound effects. Amnesia does offer a ton of exposition in it, with background story being told from cutscenes or notes picked up around the castle. I won't go too deep into the details of the story, but it is something that was pretty interesting to play around with. You give yourself amnesia in order to escape, only for it to come back. Ultimately, there is a lot of detail in this and it is good. However, it does get overbearing at times. When you're just a casual player looking for a good scare, as this the game's main appeal, then you wouldn't care much for the story. That's perfectly okay, but when you're being bombarded with tons of exposition like this, it does detract from the actual gameplay itself. The problem with trying to push a main story through notes and flashbacks is that the player would ultimately have to choose between focusing on the main story by meticulously reading every note, which can get long sometimes, or trying to focus on gameplay. This highlights a big problem, because in the heat of the moment, you're not going to think, "Oh, I wonder why Alexander poisoned those guys," while being chased by the water monster. Sure, there are low points when the game gives you time to rest and catch your breath, but nonetheless, some people would likely be more immersed in the general surrounding, like this scene. Due to the mass appeal for gamers to play this in the order for them to scare themselves, the focus is really shifted to the gameplay rather than the story, and that's where it takes a very big hit. The enemies in this game are masterfully crafted out of the nightmare someone had. When I first played this game, I was absolutely terrified at what the main enemies were and thought, how can someone come up with this? These monsters are truly horrifying, and they really do pose a threat when playing this. The mechanics of the enemies are fair. The game requires you to run away, do not look back, and hide. So I think this works well for these kind of enemies when they can run up to you and instantly kill you. Now this can turn some players off, unfortunately, because no one likes running and cowering in fear. This game does give you a mechanism of throwing stuff at them to stun them, which makes sense. As for the enemy's sound, they're not exactly the kind of growl I would expect from something whose mouth is gaping wide open. Listening to the sound without the image, then looking at the enemy's image doesn't exactly match up. Not to say that this isn't a scary sound, it's just that it isn't exactly what I think of when I see this character. It can also get a little repetitive, unfortunately. Does this game appeal to casual players? I don't know where I stand in terms of casual versus hardcore gamer, but I can at least make some observations based on it if it is accessible to those who don't play games competitively. I think that this game is fairly easy to pick up due to the simple mechanics. Unless you're using a controller, then it is a little more difficult, but doable. The fact that there is no direct combat allows for a greater room of error for those who want to learn the controls and mechanics. The puzzles are mixed in a range from challenging to really easy, and the challenging ones, like this lever one, can offer a lot of frustration to those picking up the game for the very first time. Amnesia: The Dark Descent is a masterfully crafted game in atmosphere and overall feeling of dread. It creates a great feeling of fear for you to run and hide away from your nightmarish monsters. To get the best experience, you do have to play this in the dark with headphones on. The gameplay is simple enough for casual players to pick up and play, as the instructions are pretty clear and straightforward. The music and sound design is where the game excels and a core part of the scariness of the game. Unfortunately, the story can be overbearing because the sheer amount of it, which can lead to people just ignoring it. I found myself rapidly clicking through the story at times because I was just focused on the gameplay itself. The enemy design is very excellently crafted from nightmares. While the sounds don't quite match up to it, it can still be very scary to keep you up at night. I think this is a game for horror lovers and for someone who wants a good scare with mixed puzzles ranging in difficulty. My score for this game is 82 out of 100.